morning is a document generated by the Unitarian Universalist Association Board of Trustees. They started this document in 2009 and they put it into the present form just a week ago at their meeting in Louisville around General Assembly. It's what they call the Global Ends document. And I'll explain what that means in the course of the sermon. But these are supposed to be what the association is moving towards. 1.0 Global End. A healthy Unitarian Universalist community that is alive with transforming power, moving our communities and the world towards more love, justice, and peace in a manner which assures institutional sustainability. 1.1 Congregations and communities are covenanted, accountable, healthy, and mission-driven. 1.2 Congregations are better able to achieve their missions and to spread awareness of Unitarian Universalist ideals and principles through their participation in covenanted networks of Unitarian Universalist congregations and communities. 1.3 Our faith community is intentionally inclusive, multi-generational, and multicultural. 1.4 Our faith community engages in partnerships to counter systems of power, privilege, and oppression. 1.5 Congregations have and use Unitarian Universalist Association resources to deepen the spiritual and religious exploration by people in their communities, to enhance the ministry of their members, and to improve the operation of the congregations. 1.6 There is an increase in the number of people served by Unitarian Universalist congregations and communities. 1.7 There is an increase in the number of mutually covenanted Unitarian Universalist congregations and communities. 1.8 There is an increase in the number of inspired, ordained, and lay religious leaders equipped to effectively start and sustain new Unitarian Universalist communities. 1.9 Unitarian Universalist institutions are healthy, vital, collaborative partners invested in the future of Unitarian Universalism, its principles, and theology. The Global Ends Statement. A report from Louisville. Attending General Assembly is a little like trying to get a sip of water from a fire hose. Or it's a little like the moment before you die, for all of your life in this association passes in front of your eyes. You see people with whom you've had strong connection 20 or 30 years ago, alongside those you just met. There were wonderful sermons and addresses and ceremonies from and honoring wonderful people. But this morning I'm going to leave out 99% of what I experienced so that I can try to bring you the policy essence, to give you some sense of what is going on at the association and how I encountered it. Thus, I'm not going to say anything about the wonderful words that Bill Singford had to say to Kay Montgomery on her retirement, or the Distinguished Service Award given to Mel Hoover, who richly deserved it. I'm not going to say anything about how my car shut down on I-70 in Ohio, and I had to go to the wonderful town of Zanesville, only to discover that it had been out of gas. All of those adventures I know will interest you. I am going to talk about one thing, though. I will talk about bathrooms. I love our movement and how we're always trying to figure out ways to bend the arc of history toward justice. The GA Planning Committee felt that one of the great oppressions of transgender folks was anxiety about which restroom to use. So to make the convention more welcoming to our transgender attendees, all restrooms near the plenary hall were labeled unisex. Now that would not cause a ripple in your home or in a place like this meeting house, where all of our restrooms are unisex. But in large public, multi-stall facilities, you'd be surprised at how challenging it was to go do one's ablutions among strangers of the opposite sex. The question for males of stall versus urinal suddenly had implications of politeness, consideration for the feelings of others that it never had before. I learned, for example, that women talk to one another while they're using the facility. Men do not. The stress was considerable, and by the second day, someone, not the GA committee, had taken down the unisex sign. I was sorry to see the exercise scuttle this way, but maybe it had accomplished the end of easing the anxiety of transgender folks. I know that it certainly transferred some of that anxiety to the straight community. It's one step further toward the beloved community. But back to policy matters. You might have read in the UU world about some of the big doings in our association. Let me highlight three major ones. First, the UUA is selling its beautiful brownstone headquarters at 25 Beacon Street, right next to the Massachusetts State House, and buying a nondescript modern office building in Boston's waterfront district at 24 Farnsworth Street. Some UUs are up in arms over this, though President Payne-Alex and others made a persuasive case that the move arises out of logistical and operational necessity. Payne-Alex gave his official report to the convention wearing a hard hat with a chalice logo. I have one of these myself. I didn't bring it with me, but I have one from a construction project at part of the church. Second, there has been a major tension between the board and the president. The moderator of the association presides over the board, and this recent tension is often attributed to personality clashes between Ginny Corder, the moderator who finished her term with this General Assembly, and Payne-Alex. But the specific disagreement in the April board meeting centered around whether the staff had provided adequate monitoring reports under the governance system known as policy governance. And the impasse between president and board was so significant that they all agreed to set aside $100,000 in the budget of next fiscal year to hire a consultant to help them over the impasse. A lot of UUs are upset over this expenditure of money when budgets are so tight that we laid off 10 employees in April. Third, there was a contested election for moderator, capping a campaign of 18 months. One of the candidates was Tamara Payne-Alex, a youngish black laywoman originally from Worcester, a lifelong UU, who had been on one of the panels of the Ministerial Fellowship Committee before whom I appeared in the late 1990s, and who served in many other capacities, including a long stint on the board. The other was Jim Key, a white South Carolinian about my age, who had only been in UUism for about 15 years, but who had helped found a congregation in Beaufort, SC, and had served as president of his district. Both had extensive experience as consultants to profit and nonprofit organizations. Jim Key, Tamara Payne-Alex. Now these days I go to GA without a portfolio and without an agenda. It didn't used to be this way. In the early 2000s, I produced presentations at GA under the auspices of the new Massachusetts Universalist Convention. That organization is dormant now, but 8 years ago it was active in promoting Universalist values, and I spoke on evil and the death penalty. In 2006, I was also part of an effort to form a new affiliate organization called UU Religious Naturalists, following on the explorations of the theological stance called religious naturalism I had encountered in my work in IRAS, the Institute on Religion in an Age of Science. But a funny thing happened. We got the organization incorporated and applied for affiliate status and sent in our check, but the check was returned with the explanation that the UUA board had decided to review their policy on affiliated organizations. This was a time when the UUA felt very exposed in our advocacy of same-sex marriage, and there were some who thought that our position on that violent issue was undermined by an affiliate organization called UUs for Polyamory Awareness. Polyamory, the word comes from roots meaning loving many, is the practice of having ongoing, permanent, intimate relationships with more than one partner. To be soft on polyamory, or even to be tolerant of it, seemed to some to weaken our stance for same-sex marriage between couples. I cannot prove that the polyamory issue led to the disaffiliation policy, but I believe it had something to do with it. At any rate, the board suddenly engaged in wholesale disaffiliation. All affiliate organizations had their connection to the UUA severed. Organizations such as the UU Buddhist Fellowship, the UU Christian Fellowship, the Camp and Conference Centers, the UU Historical Society, UUs Against the Death Penalty, UUs for Economic Justice. Now, most, if not all, of these organizations were separately incorporated, and some of these organizations have survived the cutoff. Some have gone under. But none of them get the automatic programming slots at GA they used to get. Many of them will have their meetings these days in nearby hotels instead of the convention center, and will have to advertise in the convention booklet and pay for a booth at the exhibit hall. And GA itself has become a staff-conceived show. I still go because it is the convention of our association, but it is the shadow of the rich bazaar of movement creativity it used to be when we had active affiliate organizations. This year, however, I got a chance to do something about that. A couple of years ago, President Peter Morales was impressed by the poll results that showed that 3 times as many people tell pollsters that they are UUs as are actually members in our church. This has led into a whole initiative called Beyond Congregations, trying to think what can be done to reach out to these folks that growth consultant Peter Bowden calls free-range UUs. I have found this initiative ironic in that the UU clamped down on the affiliate organizations which were beyond the congregations, in the sense that they crossed congregational lines, and I think helped bring people into our movement. So I've been trying to ask the question whether considering initiatives beyond congregations would include restoring the status of the affiliates. This year, I finally got to ask the question to Peter Morales at the ministers' meeting, in a public session where he takes questions from colleagues. He did not see the connection. I asked the same question to Teresa Cooley, the head of congregational life of the UUA, and she conceded at least that the disaffiliation policy had been a mistake. This 2006 action had been the board's. It had not been the doing of either President Morales or his predecessor, Bill Siegfried. But I thought that the moderator must have had a lot to do with it, and the new moderator could probably do a lot to rectify it. The second evening at GA, the moderator candidates had their final debate, and I was able to pass up this question. Was the board's disaffiliation policy of 2006 a good idea at the time, and does it still seem so today? Tamara Payne-Alex, who had been on the board at the time of the policy, said she was surprised that in the 18 months of the campaign, this was the first time this question had been asked. She then launched into an enthusiastic defense of the policy and said it was the right thing to do then and still looked like the right thing to do. She did not seem to have any consciousness of the organizations which had gone out of existence because of the policy, or I might add, the number of people not showing up at GA these days. Her opponent, Jim Key, was reluctant to criticize an action of a board on which he had not sat, but said he was open to looking at revising the policy. That exchange cemented for me the difference between the two candidates. It was reinforced by a difference I perceived in their stances on another issue, policy governance. Now, policy governance, don't go to sleep yet. Policy governance is a concept borrowed from the business world and adapted to nonprofit and religious organizations. Under policy governance, you have a board and an executive. The board is supposed to set the policy objectives, but not to direct the executives on how the executives meet these objectives. The executive's job is to figure out how to meet the objectives set by the board and report back to the board. The board deals with the forest, the executive with the trees. The nub of the disagreement between the outgoing UUA board and Peter Morales and the staff was that the board had been insisting on something called monitoring reports And the staff was saying that the monitoring reports were a meaningless waste of time. This is what led to the April impasse and the budget set aside of $100,000 for the consultant. Now, admittedly, I am no student of management, but I have been suspicious of policy governance my whole ministerial career. To me, however well it may work in a business corporation or even a nonprofit, it is ill-adapted to a religious organization. In a congregation, the executive would be the minister. But we expect our ministers to be anything but charge-ahead types. Ministers are expected to be collaborative, collegial, pastoral, non-anxious, almost the exact opposite of the charge-ahead executive. Even at the denominational level, we ask that our presidents be ministerial first. We've never elected a non-ordained president. This is a more fundamental problem of policy governance and democracy in our association. If the ultimate power rests in the General Assembly delegates, how do they register this with the leadership? Usually through the election of a president, which occurs once every 4 years, though in practical effect it is once every 8 because most presidents serve for 2 4-year terms. There is a new bylaw that after Peter, presidents will serve for only 1 6-year term. The presidents run in contested elections and have platforms, so when the voters choose one over the other, they can be said to be making a policy choice. They made no policy choice when they elect the board. That had been done by districts up until now, and from now on it will be done at large. We elected a slate of new board candidates at this GA, but they were put up by the nominating committee, and none of them made any policy appeals to us. Thus, if policy proceeds from the voters upward, it is the president, not the board, which represents their will. But under policy governance, it is given to the board to set the goals of the organization. More on this in a minute. It was clear from their discussions of policy governance that Payne-Alex was all in favor of it, and Jim Key was open to considering modifications. There was one other question asked at the moderated candidates debate. What is the first thing you would do if you won the election? Payne-Alex said she would consult with the new executive vice president, Harlan Limper, to see what kind of staff support she could expect. Jim Key said he would call up Payne-Alex to set up a meeting to see how they could work most productively together. By the end of the debate, I made my decision. I walked out of the hall and found Jim Key's table and put one of his ribbons on my name badge. Then I went on Facebook and posted a public letter to my fellow UUs as to why I was endorsing it. First, because Tamara was such an enthusiastic apologist for the disaffiliation policy, which I consider disastrous. And second, because we need a moderator who would entertain the possibility that policy governance was not the right direction for our association. Another colleague also said she thought Jim Key's answer was appropriate as to what he would do first, because the first priority of the association at this point was to heal the rift at the top. I will never know which question swayed which voters, but I was gratified that Jim Key won the vote on Saturday by a slim margin. This was particularly significant in light of the fact that Tamara had the longer record of service to the association. The vote might be seen as a tilting toward Payne-Alex and away from the outgoing board and moderator, or simply as a desire to heal the rift at the top. Jeannie Corder did have one more word. She delivered an impassioned farewell speech Sunday afternoon. I was on my way home by then, but I'd watched it on video. By the way, you can watch almost all of this stuff on video if you go through on the UUA website. In that speech, Jeannie Corder's farewell speech, she calls on the members of the association to provide the vision for us to move forward, citing the old adage from the book of Proverbs, where there is no vision, the people perish. She went on at great length about all the programs the UUA had put forward in the last 20 years and how some of them had died on the vine, been abandoned or deliberately shut down, but for most of them there was no evaluation or even attempt at evaluation to know how well they were working. Now there is something to this, but it is both a management problem and a philosophical problem. When you have a religious organization, how do you measure progress toward goals? By the number of souls brought to Jesus? By how many get into heaven? By the amount of money you bring in? She also recommended that we all take a look at the global ends. the official goals of the association set by the board under policy governance. This was the first time I had heard of global ends. I tried to pay attention around here. I'd never heard of global ends. I had to dig them out of the UUA website. It turned out that they're still being drafted by the board. The ink is not even dry on this draft. And of course, most of the board has just turned over. What the future is of these ends is anybody's guess. But under policy governance, they're supposed to provide the guidance to the executive. And the executive is supposed to report to the board to tell them how they're doing. A cursory examination of these ends shows how difficult an assignment that would be. For example, 1.2, congregations are better able to achieve their missions and to spread awareness of Unitarian Universalist ideals and principles through their participation in covenanted networks of Unitarian Universalist congregations and communities, unquote. Can you envision a report that would tell you how well this objective was being achieved? It is drafted at the highest level of abstract generality and does not lend itself to reporting of gritty particulars. I may be misreading this, but if this is the gap that the staff is supposed to bridge, a $100,000 consultant is inadequate. You need a philosopher. As a set of aspirations for the movement, this set of global ends might be all right, but we do not elect the board to express the goals of the UUA. We elect the president for that. If we need a think tank, we have the Commission on Appraisal. And considered in the abstract, this set of precepts does not appear to furnish a particularly useful guide to making policy choices, much less a basis for progress reports. What GA has done, in short, is to lead me to think about the ways that a religious organization can evaluate its effectiveness in the world, particularly when a central guiding principle of that organization is inclusiveness. To be all things to all people, which is what we UUs really strive for. So this most natural growth tendency is to pick up people and ideas like a rolling snowball and have this little cohesion. I don't think that snowball ever gets tamed. I understand that to be effective in a competitive world, business and corporations like to do rigorous assessments of what is and is not working and to shed the unprofitable divisions and become lean, mean fighting machines. It's not the UU way. We reach out to include all people and embrace many theologies. We are a walking management nightmare, in fact, because of the values we hold dear. Our management style is not lean or mean. It is inclusive. It is bubbling through. Now, all this may sound very remote from our lives in Chatham, but I think much of this philosophy applies here. We will evaluate the programs of this church from time to time. How will we do it? And I'm hoping that next year GA will not feel so remote. The last thing I did before leaving Louisville was to attend a planning meeting for General Assembly 2014, which will be in Providence. The Blue Channing District will be hosting, and that means us. If you have an idea for a presentation or program you would like to make, or like to see at next year's General Assembly, please let me know. I will pass it on. I've already put in a suggestion that they do something on Roger Williams and religious freedom, and propose the Jug Band and Jacqueline as musical contributors. There's talk of organizing a tour of Cape Cod for GA attendees before or after the convention. Would somebody be willing to provide home hospitality? I think the disagreements which have been on display ultimately are the disagreements of people who love this religion very much. As Hosea Ballou said, if we agree in love, there's no disagreement that can do us any injury. But if we do not, no other agreement can do us any good.